into unconsciousness. So what's so wonderful about all of these practices is, like, as they say, like, this is to keep you in a meditative state all day long. Well, this is to even, even take it into sleep, right at that point where you really feel your conscious mind drifting off into the unconscious. So this particular term for this is called POWA, which is P-O-W-A. And it literally translates as moving or sending your mind or your consciousness into a higher life. And, as I mentioned last week, many of us here who practice these teachings and are walking on this path, we focus more on trying to practice the Dharma well now so that you don't end up needing to do this practice. Because that's what's so really great about so much of what we're learning here, is that if you do the practices well, when you get to that point, it won't be necessary. Because your entire concept, or I should say your entire perspective on death, will have completely shifted. So that being said, this is useful. It's certainly useful, and so we'll kind of unpack it in a somewhat brief way. So that first power was referred to as resolution. So in this particular instance, what you would be doing in this moment as a meditation, if you're lying down in bed, is that there is a very full meditation visualization to this that I certainly can give to any of those who are interested. So please, just come up and speak to me or email me about it, and I would be happy to give it to you. But in the brief sense, it's where you're lying there, and as you're drifting off, that you start to you plant the image in your mind to continue the path in your next life. That's what the resolution is. You're resolving that, please let me think of other beings first. I mean, that's essentially it. And also to break down the distinction between you and other beings, just like we were doing in this meditation that we just did. And it really is, as you can imagine, that's a very powerful seed to plant, particularly at that point in your day, as you're getting ready to drift into unconsciousness, that you're just simply praying that, please let me continue this path of breaking down the tendency to think of myself first in every single instance, which is exactly what this Lojong practice is about. So the second power, which is accustoming yourself. So in this instance, we want to get to the point where we're accustoming ourselves to be thinking about others first, even in the transition of dying. And this really, more or less, gets to the point of that you're putting forth a prayer that you will maintain the wisdom and heart to be thinking about others. That's purely it. With your whole being. So that you maintain both the sense of compassion, that's essential, and the wisdom that goes along with that, which is what we've been talking about with emptiness and karma. So in the sense of that, I'm aware of that everyone I'm trying to help, they have no nature of their own, I have no nature of my own, this whole exchange has no nature of its own, and at the same time, that's exactly what frees you up and gives you the possibility to even then do anything. So there will be a time when that won't seem paradoxical. There will be a time where it's like, you're like, yeah, of course. I fully realize that that's how things are working. And this is what this does here, is that you're getting yourself so accustomed to thinking that, and that's what that part in the prayer is in the meditation. So the third power, which was pure white seeds, is that, in the process of dying, and this, of course, anyone in this room would know that who's ever been close to someone during that process, is that the mind starts to go. The mind is not thinking clearly. So here is where you're freely and happily, and also in a very organized way, divesting yourself of everything that you own. And this is very practical, which is more or less about getting your affairs in order, so when that time comes, this is not a burden for anyone else, including yourself. So, get a will made up. Make those types of decisions now, so that you're not carrying that, because the truth be told is that the mind will take that baggage on, whatever it might be. And it's a very important way to help you make yourself be ready to be anonymous. Because that's really where you want to be headed. You want to be headed to the point of anonymity. That it's no longer about me, Brian Reid, and what I'm trying to do for others. And this, in doing these types of things so that you're ready to move on in a way that is not burdensome. So the fourth power, with this wonderful name of destruction, this is really, in this instance, as you're going through this type of meditation on dying, is that you're doing the final purification of what we would say, the top 10 of your worst acts. So you would literally, and you see, this is the thing, you can do this tonight. You can be lying in bed and you can just bring to mind, what are honestly the worst things I think I've done in my life. And then this is also, of course, where you then work the Tonglen practice on that. So that when you're breathing that in, whatever those things that you most regret having done in this life, and then you are eliminating them all in your heart with that light. When that darkness pulls down into your heart, and then it just touches that flame, and then poof, you destroy them all. You destroy them all. And it's very important, if, for those people who have bodhisattva or tantric vows, that you take those vows again, is an essential stage of that as well. The fifth is referred to as prayer, and similar to the fourth step. When you're getting close to dying, and this is something that for most people is when they do get a sense of this, is when you do the ultimate Tonglen. So here, as opposed to in the destruction step where you're just thinking of your top 10 worst acts, here what you're doing is you think, and you can partition it in this way, or I should say you can kind of blow the sphere of influence in this way, which is that you think of everyone you know. And you don't even need to be specific as to, when, he used to abuse her, and, she was cheating on him, and he got her fired, It doesn't even have to be the specific acts. You just think of everyone you know, and you say, all right, I'm going to now take on all their pain. I'm going to take on all the suffering of every being I've ever known. So you take that in, and then you destroy it all. And this is this is very important in the sense of that, as we're taught, there is an extraordinary pain that happens at the point of death. And what this does is that this prepares your mind to be able to use that moment as the ultimate opportunity to shift it. And it really is extraordinary in that way. And you can see how doing this practice, as a nightly ritual, where you make the pain that you see all throughout the world your pain, and then you eliminate it all, then that is, what else do you need to do? What else do you need to do? And it's, as I said, in going into the full meditation, it gets into more detail and more characteristic as to how to practice that more succinctly. But that's essentially POA. And it is something that, once receiving the full meditation, it's something that you can teach to others. You can give to others who want to use it earnestly. They don't have to be any type of Buddhist practitioner. They don't need to practice any spirituality. I mean, we've had, there have been some practitioners that have helped people in the process of dying, and they ended up giving them this practice because, as they were speaking to the person, and they said that, and that's a very powerful seed, of course, a karmic seed, where someone who is quote unquote not a practitioner, and they get told about this, and then they're like, give me that. I'm lying here, dying, and first of all, I believe that, okay, I can do something. I can do something. And in that sense, you can see then that's why this is very, very powerful. There is a story that's been passed down since, around, I want to say 1175, which Geshe Chikawa, who's the one who wrote this whole practice and passed it down, when he was at the place where he was on his deathbed, and so he was, practicing what he had preached and translated for all of us. And so he was at the prayer stage, and so, of course, this is an extremely wise, compassionate being, and there were a bunch of the monks that had been, receiving teachings from him that were all gathered around him. And he, as he was lying there, he had chosen that he wanted to send his mind to hell, because he wanted to send his mind to hell to go there and help all the beings in the hell realm. And which certainly speaks to what kind of practitioner he was, that was his motivation, at this point. That's the level of what I'll do with this practice. Is actually I want to go to the hell realm and really see what good I can do down there. So as he's all the monks are aware of this, and they're all gathered around him, nice and close, and in prayer and meditation, and then he starts he starts moaning, and he's like, no, and all the monks they gather up around there, and they're like, what, Geshe-la, what's happening to you? And he's like, no, and they're like, tell us what is it, what can we do? He's like, I'm trying to go to hell. And they're like, please, are you in pain? He's like, and there's all these angels taking me to paradise, and I can't stop them. And that is a true story. That is a true story. That because he had been doing these, as I said from the beginning, because he had been practicing the way he had practiced, that he got to that point, and in the conventional way we're talking about doing POA, there was no need for that. It was like, he had already made the impressions on his mind that he was forced by his own actions to then go into a heaven, into a heaven realm. But what's key there, of course, is like, what was his last motivation? You know, his last motivation was one to go be as most helpful to basically the beings that people want to help in the least. You know, full on, you know, however you want to define a demon, you know, your boss, your ex, you know, a family member, you know, so these tend to be, you know, the people we're most afflicted by, that we're most fearful of, and want to have the least amount to do with. You know, that for us can be a hell being. Doesn't have to be some, you know, Dante's Inferno level type description. And that's just what's so distinctly beautiful about what he did in his practice, is that he was forced then by Lojong practicing to be happy forever. So let's move on to the fifth point. So the fifth point really focuses on, you know, when you can say that you're succeeding in the practice, you know, meaning that you're doing pretty well with developing bodhicitta. And this is really, you know, personally I find this very useful, which is that there's just some times that you need the motivation. Things get really tough, you know, and you're perceiving sometimes a lot of pain going on in your life and around you, and to have these moments, these barometers where you can check in and say, okay, all right, that's working well, you know, I'm making some progress in that. It's not all crap, you know, and, you know, in terms of, you know, crap, I mean, Geshe Michael ended up like using that word for one of these points to describe that, because it's something we're dealing with all the time. So the first line, which says, all Dharma comes down to a single point. So it's important here for us to really, you know, get a good sense of first of all, what Dharma means in this instance, in this practice, because there are about countless definitions for Dharma. And you can honestly say that you're practicing Dharma when your tendency to look out for yourself first and ignore others is getting less and less. I mean, that's essentially it. I mean, that in the sense of Lojong, anything that lowers your tendency to watch out for yourself first, then that is practicing the Dharma. That is the Dharma. Sometimes it's good to think about, okay, what does the activity of an enlightened being look like on planet Earth? I mean, in a really, really practical way. So what that would look like is when you see one being trying to help out another being, and be that physically, you know, or verbally, or it can simply be that they are trying to speak or even think kindly of others. I mean, that's it really doesn't get any more complex than that. When you understand how things are really working, you really understand the ultimate nature of reality, then you'll be able to see you'll see other people's minds. You'll see what they're thinking and what they're feeling. But until such time, you know, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, and so what I'm going by, of course, is by action. So if I look at Veronica, you know, going to get a cup of tea, and I see her hand that off to someone else first, and then she goes and gets herself a cup, then, you know, to me, that's that's exactly what an enlightened activity is. I can't read her mind. I don't claim to have that power. But that action right there, as I'm going to interpret it, is to be one that is selfless. Now, she totally could have the most selfish thing going on in her mind, but that's not the point. The point is, I'm not trying to sit here and try to figure out, like, what is it she's thinking? What is her motivation? That's not the point of your practice. It's really going off by seeing, like, okay, how are the people behaving in your world? And thus then reflecting and realizing then that that's a reflection on how you have behaved. So I could only see her doing such a thing as that if I had done something similar, in the past. There is a secondary definition of Dharma in this sense, and that's really that anything that lowers your tendency to have mental afflictions. And that's an important distinction, because you know that you're succeeding in the practice if you're experiencing less anger, less sadness, less craving, quite honestly, in the most broad sense of that. And if those experiences are not lessening, then you're not succeeding. And that's not to, and that is to serve to kick your ass. I mean, that's exactly what that's there for. That's not to then have a pity party about the fact of, like, oh man, I'm really failing. That's the thing about it, is that you're given this practice, which is one of compassion and opening your heart up to that which it is that you need to continue working on. And that's the beauty of it, because it's not as though you are self-existently bad, that you are self-existently a failure. What this is showing you, what you're showing yourself is like, okay, this is what I need to work on. This is what I need to work on. It's impossible for everything to be bad. That's, so you can immediately write that off. That's just an impossibility. It doesn't make sense logically, and it also doesn't make sense in the spiritual context we're talking about it. So the flip side is, of course, is that when you do take a moment to reflect at the end of your day on, yeah, I really didn't get pissed off today at anyone. Good, check. Check. Nice. More of that. And see, the moment that you acknowledge that, then of course you're planting that seed in your mind of that's good, And there's that desire as well that's planted of, like, and more of that, please. I want to do more of that. The next line is, there are two judges, keep the main one. Now obviously, when we think about judges, you can either go off of what others think about your practice, or you can go off of what you know to be true about your inner self and your practice. So, keeping the main judge is you. I mean, that's the one you want to focus on. I mean, obviously you know what you're up to. You know what you've done, and you know what you're thinking. And that there is the main judge. That's the main judge. And there's this beautiful nuance in this, and that is that when you think, you think of yourself as the judge, then there's an inner and outer aspect to that, kind of this kind of inner judge, outer judge examples that are given. So for instance, there's someone who's a failure on the inside, who's failing in their practice on the inside, but looks very successful with their practice on the outside. So an example of that would be, someone that you go to yoga class, you go to meditation, and you see someone, and they are just like unbelievably straight and upright. I mean, it's just like yoga journal cover. You're looking at them and just they're so aligned and they are completely still. So this person is, in this position. So the outside looks completely successful. On the inside, this person is thinking about how completely still they are and completely upright and perfect in form they are. That's the failure on the inside. And we all have done versions of this. And it's, even for that passing moment of, where it's like, especially with meditation, you're like really getting into your position, or if you're in asana and you're in downward dog and you're like, I am totally nailing this, and it's, this is, there's the enlightened self-interest aspect of that, but you're the check on that. You're the check on that, always. If you've got others, so immediately if it's coming after that, so this is really great that I can teach this well to others, and so forth. But that would be an example of that. And then there is, of course, I love this story. Failure on the outside, success on the inside. So there's two amazing practitioners in this lineage that go back to about the 11th century. One of is Naropa, who maybe some of you have heard of because he's formed much of greatness in the yoga lineage, and so he had this was a fully realized being, and he had a student, Marpa, who was demonstrating that he had some more to learn from his teacher, Naropa. So anyway, Marpa, was looking for Naropa, and he went down to find him down at the banks of the Ganges. And Marpa shows up, and Naropa's down. And see, now Naropa looked like what we call kind of Mahasiddhas or sadhus, which is that he looked like an insane homeless man. I mean, he was this very gnarly looking guy. And so he's down at the river banks, and Marpa, finds him, and he sees that Naropa is, catching fish and pulling them up on shore, and then he's like gutting them and killing them. And Marpa is totally horrified of seeing his teacher breaking what's probably the cardinal sin of karma of killing. And so Naropa, realizing this, decided to teach Marpa that, give him another teaching in that things do not exist as they appear. He can do this because he has perceived emptiness directly. He understands how things are working completely. So as Marpa actually is condemning Naropa, he takes the fish that he's gutted, throws them in the water, and they swim away. And of course, Marpa is totally freaked out. and it's for us, there are many lessons out of that. But fundamentally, it goes that, this is someone where both when we say looking at the appearance of what looks to be something really heinous, really wrong, and it's like, what's going on inside? It's because inside that man's heart, Naropa's heart, was something that knew the truth of how things are working. And because he knew that, then what many of us are still working on is trying to understand this thing of like how the form of the fish, in the sense of what we perceive as life and death, he's completely shattered that concept. And so what he's trying to do is help his student out by showing like, hey man, don't so easily judge by what it is that you think is going on here on the outside. So that's the failure. That's the failure on the outside of the practice, but certainly successful on the inside. So the third is, of course, much more simple, which is like, okay, who who looks like they're succeeding on the outside and the inside. And in this same instance, actually, with Naropa, you would say this, and this would be, if you have one, would be, is your teacher, is your Lama. It could be His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. It could be your mom, your dad, your grandmother. That person where you'd almost, when you think of them, you're like, you know what, they could do no wrong. And, that's what you really feel in your heart when you think about them, is that they could seem to just do no wrong in your mind. And in the moments where then you even think about them, like, that you think like, oh, well, they kind of screwed that up or whatever, but it's like, you kind of immediately give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's how much you believe in the goodness of that person. And so that's someone where you're like, yeah, I see the success of their practice on the outside and on the end. Now, when it comes to the failure on both the outside and the inside, this is where the only person you could really say that about is yourself, and not even your worst enemy, because unless you're an enlightened being, you can't see their mind, you can't see their heart, you don't know what's going on inside. It's just like Naropa, gutting the fish. But you certainly could assess that of yourself. You could look in the mirror and say, yep, who I see there and what I just, the fight I just had with that person on the phone, yeah, that person I see, and the body that I'm in, and the heart and mind that's inside it, it felt like it was really not practicing well for that moment. So it's very useful in that way. It's very useful in that way. The bottom line is to trust your intelligence. Trust your heart instead of yourself, because yourself can be totally selfish. So trust your intelligence, trust your heart, trust your mind, the intellect of your mind. Let that be your guide. The next line is, be joy alone in an unbroken stream. Now, this is, I think this is just so fundamental for all of us, which is the fact that, being unhappy is the cause and the result of bad karma. I mean, it's both. And as far as what we believe, what we practice is that the only good karma of unhappiness is regret. But being sad, being anxious, angry, or upset means that in that moment we're lacking awareness of emptiness and karma, meaning we're lacking thinking of the pen, as we've practiced so many times before. The good cannot come from bad, and vice versa, because the content of the two actions is not similar. That on a very base level is what's going on. That content is not the same. And the sadness or the anger or the anxiety certainly doesn't fix the problem when we're feeling it. And it's certainly obviously not the result of anything good that we've done. That's not the result of it. Therefore, embrace what's happening. Embrace what's happening. Do not deny it. Lift it up out of the selfishness of, I don't like this, and get over your suffering self. I mean, that can be very serviceable in a moment, is just literally feeling that, you know, I feel like shit right now, or I feel very angry, or I'm really upset, and it's just like I am going to lift myself, my mind, my heart up out of this because I don't like it. I don't like what's happening. I don't like the fact that my friend is dying. And because what that's going to do is that's going to help to get you over the part of your mind and heart that is just attached to suffering, that's deeply embedded in it. And that can begin with embracing what's going on, embracing it, which is very different than accepting it. You know, and sometimes that can be, sometimes that's what it needs to be for you, especially when it comes to something like someone you know who dies that you're close to, is just getting to a point of accepting it. But if you can get to that embrace, because that embracing something, I mean, when we think about that, when we think about hugging something, that's where there is a feeling of joy in that. You know, and that's what we're really doing here when they say be joy alone in an unbroken stream. It's like maintaining a heart that is constantly saying yes, and to do what Jack Kornfield has said, which is that particularly when it's really difficult, you say to yourself, yes, even this, so that yes doesn't stop. You know, that you're transforming what used to be no into a yes. That is going to be ultimately embracing it. And it's the ability to say yes. It's that ability to say yes that actually wakes you up. And it wakes up your mind and heart in that moment. When you look at the situation and it's really, really tough to deal with, and you say to yourself, yes, even this. The next line is, it's there when you can keep it unthinking. It sounds a little bit more tricky than it actually is. I mean, it just really means that you've learned the Lojong practice well enough that you don't even need to correct yourself anymore. That your happiness in this particular practice will get to the point where it's not attached to its contributing qualities. So in this sense, it's when we say like it's all good. That's really what that means. Like you will reach a point in which your understanding of happiness, and I really stress this in terms of your understanding of it, not even talking about the feeling of it. Because even in my own experience, what I used to define as happiness 3 years ago has deeply and distinctly changed and has become much more expansive into the realms of what I definitely would have said, that does not make me happy, you know. And now my attitude on that has shifted into the place of where, like, well, I can absolutely include that in the realm of what that label happiness could mean. You know, I might not be feeling it yet, but I can understand how it could be that. And that's an amazing step, because your awareness of how things are really working starts to become your fundamental frame of mind with this practice. I mean, you get to this point where you're able to regain your balance, or in this sense, your awareness, actually by losing it. So therefore, distractions, what used to be a distraction, like you say, like, oh, I'm having trouble meditating, my mind is continually distracted. becomes part of your practice. The distraction becomes part of your practice. And that's huge. That's huge. When you get to the point where you have the mind and heart to see that, to use the distraction in a way that that brings you to a deeper understanding of how things are really working. And it also starts to open up your heart. Like you actually feel that, like literally something goes like, that moment of feeling that. And it's so it's so exquisite to me in the sense that you're no longer then a slave to your mental afflictions and your circumstances. That's what's happening there. Because that's basically where we're at 99.9% of the time. Is we're operating, we're operating in reaction to am I hot, am I cold, am I hungry? It's too dark, it's not light enough, wish it was warmer. That's just constantly going on. But see, through these practices, then you get to the point where it's like, what's this make me think of? Even if it brings you right to this, back to this point, you're like, oh, there's something in the Lojong there where it was talking about like, oh yeah, even in those moments where I feel imbalanced, the only way that I can then feel balanced is in those moments as well when I've lost my balance. So then you see where it's like, oh, okay, I'm starting to being able to work it on both sides. Because there's a long time there where it's just like, no, I'm constantly trying to feel centered, feel focused, get single pointed. And then you start to be able to bring this practice in where it's just like, no, I'm going to use the fact that I don't feel centered right now. I don't feel centered right now. What is it I want to do? I want to be centered. That brings me back to the center. Then you realize I never could have got to that center unless I felt off center. So this is the nature of interdependence. This is the nature of how we work with karma and with emptiness all the time, is using what we've got, using what's there, using what's happening, not ever denying it and embracing it with our mind and embracing it with our heart. And then we can make some real traction. So, let's take a break there. Take a little break and we'll dive in a little deeper.
Are you warm?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah? Why are you?
No.
No? Okay.
Oh, is all these lights on? Is he sweating? I can't tell.
No,
Okay.
well, thank you. did you ask about? That basically refers to the four bodies of the Buddha. And in particular there, though, when it's saying see the deception as being four bodies. So the deception being, of course, that we see things as self-existent. And so it's pointing us there to actually see, particularly with other beings, with all living beings, that we see them as particularly what's called the Dharmakaya, which is, oh yeah, you have it? Awesome. So the emptiness of the mind, body, of the Buddha. So that's what that's specifically pointing to. It's just like, when you're trying to see the deception of what's going on, particularly in those moments of upset with someone else, that it's like, oh, this is the Dharmakaya. This is the emptiness this is the emptiness body of what is the true nature. And it's something that, the Dharmakaya, which, we could spend months unpacking the four bodies, and we really, my wife and I really particularly love talking and sharing about them, because it's really an amazing practice to work with them. But the Dharmakaya ends up being, it's not the one that you see, the way we see things. It is the emptiness body, and sometimes, it would be translated as the mind of the Buddha. And that's why it's so beautifully situated there to say, when you're having trouble, with whomever this person is, or with this animal or something like that, is that the Dharmakaya is in the potential of that being. That's really what you want to focus on to help you see the deception that's playing out in front of your eyes.
And so everything is empty, and whatever our perception is of whatever it is that we're looking at is from our past lives and our karma and things as well. So everything is empty. Like, for example, I don't know if it's wrong to ask you if you've ever seen empty desserts. I'm not gonna ask.
Okay.
But for people that have, they can go back and forth. Like, they see what their deception is, and they also see what emptiness is. Is that correct?
Well, in terms of seeing what their deception is,
And one more question too, 'cause this second part of it, because I'll forget it otherwise. But once you've seen emptiness directly, does it come and go, or is it there and you always see it?
There are levels. There is, as in terms of what we're taught, is that when someone has, the direct perception of emptiness, is that depending on where they're at in their mind stream, because there's varying levels of that perception. Well, let's just look at the first. That experience, in particular, sometimes in our lineage, is referred to an experience that might last like 20 minutes, and then you're out.
Is it only during meditation, or is it?
It is said to happen only in the deepest meditation. But now the form, the form of that, though, that can take many forms. It is not written in the text that that's you sitting on your cushion, or on a rock or at the base of a tree for that to happen. The key is that you are in single pointed concentration. You're in shamatha. So it's only when you're in that. So you could be doing something, and that happened. But then you do come out of it, and then there are various there are various powers that come out of that in that moment, which is that, you know, for a period of time, a short period of time, you are able to read you are able to see other people's minds. You see, what you see then is that because when you're in direct perception, duality breaks down. There is no more duality. And that's, of course, what we're dealing with in every moment, you know, of our minds. When you come out, though, is that, and so then that duality starts to reassert itself, you know, the seeds you have for that.
Right.
So then, yeah, but what then, obviously depends on the mind, is that you can then, because you've had that experience, obviously what that seed creates is incredibly huge, that it gets to the point, there are what we call bodhisattva levels and so forth, where then you get to the point where you're just basically purifying bad karma. You know, you get to the point where you are able to see the deception going on. You're aware of it. You're completely aware of it all the time. You're also aware of that you still have to burn off these past bad actions, you know. And the thing about that, which keeps the pride in check, is the fact of that they say like a ninth level bodhisattva, who is someone who's just, you know, just basically almost the point of total and full enlightenment. There could be, that mind still does not know what those specific bad seeds are. So there could be one bad seed that comes along that could be extremely devastating, you know, extremely devastating. It could be, you know, they say there's so many ways that this is handled in terms of, it could be one last selfish act, you know, which would be hugely damaging to their mind stream in that way. So in that sense, these people or these beings are not living in the direct perception, you know, of emptiness all the time. If they were, then they would have no duality. There would be no bad karma that still needs to be taken care of. But until such time, that'll be the case. So that's kind of like, if you were to track this thing, that's what's so great, is that you have the direct perception of emptiness. So wow, okay, you're fully aware of that. When you come out of it, you're fully aware of that. And your heart is exploded open to such a degree that as we're taught, it is, there, you have no doubt then about, you see directly how many lifetimes you have left, you know. You get enough of these kind of very powerful powers and seeds that ripen coming out of that, so for instance, if you came out of that and you saw directly, I have, you know, 4 more lifetimes. Now you could have a seed that would ripen right then that would cause you to be like, you know, what do I have to worry about?
But that'll take you back now.
Ooh, exactly. Exactly.
Constantly changing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so great because you see, so the practice keeps you on point in that way, you know, and it's really beautiful because, you know, depending on who you look at, you know, of these teachers and so forth, it's incredible because, you know, for instance, when I see, you know, when I see my Lama, you know, Lama Marut or Geshe Michael, you know, it's just all good all the time with them, you know, and.
But do they still see people suffering, they just know it's deception? But they know that they still have work to do because these people are suffering, and that's why they can go.
And that's what's great, because then that's the only reason you're around, you know, that's the only reason you're around, is to, you know, as they say, there's one of the vows is that you don't need to stay in the cycle of suffering to be of service to people. Which is very, very important. I mean, on the
That's renunciation.
yeah, and I mean, on the bodhisattva level, is that as it says, is that you want to reach total enlightenment, so that then you can be ultimately of true service to all living beings, you know, and it's something that, you know, perceiving that you see the suffering. See, this is the thing, you see the suffering going on, but that enlightened mind doesn't see suffering the way we do. They see the emptiness. They see how it is potential, just like everything else. It's no longer the qualities and characteristics that we attach to that label the way we do. You know.
And can you have seen emptiness without being a bodhisattva, or or practicing bodhicitta? I mean,
Yeah, it is actually in the path that one doesn't have to be, you know, taking bodhisattva vows or practicing the bodhisattva path in order to do that. The huge difference is that it tends to take a lot longer, and when I say a lot longer, I mean many more lifetimes. That's the kind of way these things work in that sense, is that in the, what we would say, like, you know, kind of the open or foundational path, that I mean, they use a term like, oh, it takes 3 countless eons, but you'll get there. You know, now of course, you don't know where you are in those 3 countless eons. You might be really like very near the end of the 3rd countless eon, you know, and so forth. But in the bodhisattva path, is that it accelerates it to the point of that, like you said, you can see, you'll eventually, in having the direct perception of emptiness, and you'll see how many lifetimes, and hey, you know, 9 lifetimes in the grand scheme of countless, since beginningless time, is hardly anything. And then, of course, on the tantric level is single lifetime. You know, and that's why it is, you know, that's why it is the highest. And I should say that is why it is regarded as the most powerful path.
say that one more time.
That on the tantric level, the tantric practice is geared towards realizing total enlightenment in a single lifetime. That's why it is considered to be, you know, the most powerful blessing, to be able to enter into those practices and enter into that level of wisdom, you know. But yeah, no, you don't need to be a bodhisattva to have that, you know, have a direct perception of emptiness, you know, which is also really good, because it keeps it the way it should be, which is that it keeps equanimity, you know, it keeps equanimity. Like emptiness is for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't, to break down the sense of hierarchy, you know, like, oh, you know, you're not this or you're not that, you know, so you can't understand, you know, no, not at all. I mean, I don't know, in course one of you guys been talking about Lama Marut at all?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes back to that, you know, so if you're in what's considered to be the most advanced, you know, practices and so forth, it is still just a different perspective on the Lama Marut. I mean, it still just comes back to that's step one, the first step. So that's one of the aspects that I really love so much about this. I mean, I guess, you know, kind of growing up Catholic, I certainly felt equanimity in the sense of like, okay, yeah, everybody's got a chance to go to heaven, but I didn't even. I guess I didn't, you know, the only 2 paths to me kind of seemed like, okay, well, you either get ordained or you're not, you know. So it was like, there's what the ordained nuns and priests are doing, and then there's like the rest of us, you know, and all the variations of that, cardinals, bishops, but I put them all together. I'm like, okay, well, they probably got a good chance of getting through the pearly gates pretty well. And, you know, for us, then I'm like, then there's the rest of us who are not. But here, you know, what I've experienced in these teachings is something of seeing how it all comes down to your individual path, you know, and each path is perfect. Each path will get you there, you know. It will eventually get you there. And sometimes, in some ways, you can just say a matter of when, you know, when. And ultimately to that I would say, and when it happens, as they say, when it happens, you will have always realized that you were enlightened. When you realize enlightenment, you will always realize that you were that. And so that even as well, like just hearing that is like, man, that's nice. That's the way it should be, That's the way it should be. So yeah.
A question. So, if we're all empty, at the very end, is there a heart, is there a soul, or is it just Buddha nature? Is it, because what keeps reincarnating, what keeps, and what eventually doesn't? Is it an essence? Is it something? Is that I don't know if I'm phrasing it correctly.
Yeah, it's tricky to articulate. It is the absence of something. So someone would say, well, isn't that something? Yes, but not how we understand that. That's why we're trying to perceive it directly in order to understand that. So in terms of what moves on, we say the mind moves on, but the mind is not self-existent. The mind is still being projected as well. So, and for certain people, they can use the label of soul or their heart. I mean, in some ways, I think that's very beautiful to say that the heart moves on. Of course, it's just how you're defining that. If you're defining that as that, the experience of life, it's like, oh yeah, well then that will go on. I mean, that's the whole thing about it. And I was thinking about this the other day, just like, even when people want to say death is an end, where is that, where is that end? Where is that definitive moment of saying the life ended? Now, for some people, they break that down and say, okay, when the body is stopped, the body stops, the heart stops beating, the mind stops functioning. But see, the brain stops functioning. But then it's like, okay, so if you make it a physical thing, there's already a discrepancy there, because it's to say, like, so you're associating the mind and the body are of the same nature, which they're not. I mean, clearly the body is physical matter and the mind is not that. So that already starts to, unhinge that. So this idea of like an end, it's like, I love it because for me, it's like, I was thinking about, it's like, there is no end. Like, it's just, everything is just going to keep on moving on. It's going to just keep on trucking.
What goes, what keeps going.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where, we bring in, we're like, okay, we'll use the word mind, we'll use the mind, and then it's like, okay, well, what is the mind? And it's, you would say, the previous moment of mind, so using that label of mind is you got to make that serviceable for you. So, and each person needs to define that for themselves personally in that way. But there will be this, whatever your sensation and experience of what life is, what energy is, what love is, what movement is, that keeps moving on. But then, of course, the forms that takes, that keeps changing. And what's beautiful is that it's not as though when you realize total enlightenment, that suddenly like something has stopped, because someone say, well, your suffering has stopped. Well, that's easily debatable, because the enlightened mind could still be perceiving suffering, but they're not interpreting it, in our suffering way, So it's a beautiful thing. It's like, things will keep moving. So it kind of takes some of the fear away in some ways, Just kind of lifts up some of that, like, oof, that's it. We kind of joke with ourselves of like, well, hopefully where I'm at, in my understanding of how things are working, like, yeah, I want that to end. I want that to keep progressing. I want that, yes, definitely. So, Keep on.
Keep on keeping on, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. All righty. Beautiful. So I think that, I think that this brings us to the sixth point. And the sixth point is this is a lot of fun. This is where I was talking about, like, where the song really starts to kick in as we get into the lyrics here, the Lojong lyrics. This one is really, this really pertains to, I think we were saying way back in the first week, the special commitments that you make to yourself to practice throughout the day. And sometimes they're referred to as the 18 pledges. And really, it just fundamentally comes down to kind of 18, I would say 18 practical guidelines for how to live with a good heart every day. I mean, just that. Now, what you could do is that in a single meditation session, you could take 3 of these as we go through them. You could take 3 of them and just review them in a meditation to just basically see how well you've been practicing. And if you're keeping one of these, if you're keeping the book, then you definitely can you can work them into the rotation for a while, which is fun as well. Sometimes if depending on what your book practice is, if it's vows, if it's other guidelines, these are so great to work into that because they're so very strong at developing bodhicitta, developing that wish, the wish that we all want to have, which is to realize eternal happiness so that we can teach others how to do the same thing, and also understand ultimately how things are working. So these are wonderful barometers for being able to measure how well you're practicing bodhicitta, developing your wish. So as we get into this, Geshe Michael, who did the translation here, he talked about how some of the translations might seem a bit radical, and you'll see why. And that's simply because the Kadampas who originated this practice. I mean, this exists in, I believe, Kadampas, Gelug, which is His Holiness in the practice, the lineage that we follow, Nyingma, and I believe there's one other lineage that it practices in, but the Kadampas those were some crazy ass monks back then. They were doing some things that ruffled the feathers, and so he wanted to keep that quality in translating them. Now the first one is not so radical. The first one says keep to the 3 laws. So the 3 laws. So the first one is to not act in a way that contradicts what you have committed to. So on a basic level, that's just honoring your prior commitments. Whatever you've committed to in life. Now, certainly, if you have vows, then if you've taken freedom vows, that's all of those pertain to not harming others. If you've taken bodhisattva vows, those pertain to how to love others. And if you've taken tantric vows, those pertain to maintaining a special ways of viewing the world so that you will realize enlightenment in a single lifetime. So you want to not act in any way that contradicts those. So in other words, keeping your vows and just simply honoring your commitments. The second one is, the second law is saying that, don't place yourself in dangerous situations or do do needless harm to your body. So not placing yourself in dangerous situations unnecessarily, or because this really flies in the face of trying to practice in the world compassion for every living being. And each of us needs to, there's when you see something, whatever, there's a fight and so forth, a physical fight happens, and you go and you run into the middle of it. But see, there are varying degrees of that. The physical dimensions give you a telling on that right away. Like, okay, do I really think I can break this fight up? But then that's when the skillful means come in, which is that, what way in using your mind can you see of trying to break this fight up? Because there is, there's obviously when you're like, yeah, I can use my body. I can get in the middle of this and try to stop it. But you don't want to do this needlessly, particularly as it relates to keeping these commitments that you've made for yourself and the way you want to live your life. The third is to not fall into the habit of discriminating between others. I mean, this essentially means just to treat others equally. And, that level of discrimination is really that, oh, I like this person, I don't like this person so much, so I'm going to do this thing for the person I like first. And the much stronger practice is to be like, I will do this thing for the person I dislike. Because then you start to level the playing field for yourself. You'll get it to the point where then there are no people you dislike, and you're liking everything and you want to do everything for everyone all the time. So the second pledge, or the second guideline, is change your mind and stay the same. So this kind of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, which is where you want to do the work on the inside, but look normal on the outside. You don't want to be drawing attention to the fact of like, oh, I'm doing such good things for humanity. Everybody look, that's the last thing you want to be doing. And so if fundamentally what you're working with on the inside is what we refer to as the three principal paths, which is that you're working, with some sense of renunciation in your life. You're trying to renounce the ways of living that contribute to your suffering. And those are pretty easily definable for most of us. And then, of course, there's compassion, acting with compassion. And then, of course, the most crucial as it relates to both of those two is correct worldview, which is using your understanding of emptiness and karma as you go about doing these things, as you go about renouncing the things that are sources of suffering for your life and acting with compassion. Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about this particular pledge is that it forces you to change the way you're behaving without self-cherishing, which is what gives it such great traction. Because the truth is that, if your Buddhist career is progressing nicely, then you will start to look differently. You will start to appear differently to others. And they will be, these beings, these beautiful beings will be saying those things to you. So you want to be able to do this, humbly, though. You want to do it with a sense of humility at all times. So don't advertise. Just don't advertise it. The next one is speak not of what was broken. Now, this relates to not publicizing other people's spiritual mishaps, particularly in reference particularly in reference to their spiritual traditions. So it's very specific in that way. That you don't decide, you know what they're thinking, doing what you think is wrong. Because that's, I mean, quite honestly, I mean, I see myself doing that all the time. I perceive what they're doing is wrong. And what I don't consciously think of, but is definitely part of the MO is, and I know what they're thinking. Sometimes we even say that to ourselves, particularly with, family or close friends or someone who it's just like, she always acts this way. You know what she does? And baked right into that is that you understand her mentality. If you are an enlightened being, please excuse yourself from this rule. Because then you do know what's up. You know what's going on in their mind. But for the rest of us who are not, you can only ever act at your level of perception. So you don't want to get into micromanaging the spiritual life of another person. It's very bad karma to generate in your life. and it's particularly important for us here at this center. Any church, temple, Dharma center is to particularly just not get into that micromanaging of other people's spiritual well-being in their practice. The next one is never worry about what they're doing. So very similar to the previous in terms of that, you don't want to worry so much about other people's problems, specifically though in terms of pointing out their mental afflictions instead of taking care of your own. So it's not the like, oh, I don't care about anybody's problems. It was just that in terms of like, oh yeah, I want to point these out, the ways that they're screwing up in their practice, instead of looking at like, oh, okay, so you have this moment of acknowledging like, that looked really, really kind of unkind what they just did. All right, so I see, I realize that, that's what I'm perceiving. What does that say about like, let me turn that in. Let me, let me put the mirror up. So you want to put that mirror up right away. The next is rid yourself of the biggest affliction first. Well, okay, so that's pretty straight up, pride, anger, desire. Go for whatever your worst one is first and devote all your efforts towards that one, dismantling that. And it's interesting too, isn't it, that we seem to be pretty adept at identifying number 2 or 3 or 4, but the biggest one is the one, honestly, is that we don't want to admit to, or we're so consumed by it that we don't even see it. So if that's the case, if you're really, and I say this in totally a non-judgmental way, if you're really having trouble being like, man, I don't know what the worst one is, I've got a couple, then this is where you can start to look at the reflections of people in your life. I mean, and you can ask those that you trust, and say, if you had to say, what do you think my number 1 flaw is? And it's amazing how the consistency will reveal itself. Sometimes it'll freak you out. You ask 5 people and all 5 say the exact same thing. Then you can pretty much take like, okay, that might be the one. You have that on your list and you're like, okay, it's definitely pride. I mean, at a certain point, and this is very important in this practice, at a certain point when you feel like you've been practicing on the most obvious form of that affliction, for whatever that is for you, then redirect your focus to some of the lesser afflictions for a while. And the whole reason to do that is because then you'll be able to come back to what you consider to be that primary problem with a fresh perspective on it. And of course, karmically, what you're doing is you've been lessening it. So that's what's so wonderful about it, is that, karmically you've been working on it, and you start to see it, and like, ooh, you start getting into the subtleties, more and more the subtleties of how you do that. And that's tremendous for your practice. The next is never hope for any reward. So let's be more practical about that, which is that, no discredit to John Lennon, but don't hope for any instant karmic results. Karma has a ripening period. Nagarjuna talks about that. Says if there was no ripening period, then everything would be a paradise already. So it's very important to remember that that karma is like a garden. I mean, that's what you're working with. It's like a garden. So you plant these karmic seeds in every single moment, and that fruit, it's not going to ripen into fruit in 24 hours. That said, if you keep doing the virtuous things, even though it doesn't instantly appear in front of you, that means you are gaining also a greater understanding of emptiness. Because what you're doing then is that you don't want to doubt in the gap. Like, you don't want to be doubting in that karmic gap between, okay, I did this thing, and then, whatever. Truth be told is that you'll receive karmic confirmation within a few months. That part that we can say that in these teachings. Like, once your practice gets strong enough with your understanding of how things are really working, is that you will, and it'll sometimes be on a very, very slight level, And of course, there are the others that could be decades, and if you believe in it, it could be next life. It could be the next lifetime, but it will come around. The second meaning of this is to really is to not hope for some little good karmic result. I mean, when you're dedicating your actions, go big ticket on these. That I'm dedicating this, that I have the direct perception of emptiness within the next 3 months. Whatever it might be. And now, does that mean it's going to happen with 3 months? Don't ask me. I cannot see that. But numbers have their own power that you give them in your mind. So work that karma. Work that. The next is stop eating poison food. Is that what it says? Stop eating poisonous food or poisonous, something like that. Poison food, is that what it says? Okay. Which sounds very practical, right? Stop eating poisonous food, yes. Eventually that's going to cause some harm. That might be fairly instant. Well, we'll start with this word that the bodhisattva, for the bodhisattva, their responsibility is that they are working to realize total enlightenment for the benefit of others, to teach others how to do the same thing. And it's within the higher practices that it becomes, in the tantric practices, that it becomes your responsibility to actually give top priority to your own practices to bring you to total enlightenment as quickly as possible. That's you're working within a framework of a single lifetime, whereas the bodhisattva who's working with it is working with as soon as possible. That could be a couple of lifetimes. Now, at the other levels, which of course many of us are on, serving others with the motivation of taking care of yourself first actually poisons those actions. I mean, the good karmic seed gets corrupted by focusing more on what it will do for you. And but these, there are the subtle levels of this. I mean, obviously, you understanding where you are in your own path, the most important thing here is that, you want to have a sense of selflessness in dedicating the actions that you do in this life. You want to have that kind of mentality with what you're practicing, at all times. All right, the next is don't let the stream flow smooth. Now that sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, it's something that we want to, like a nice smooth stream. Now, this is, this basically boils down to the fact of that, when you become aware that you're having a mental affliction, you're in the middle of it, that you put up a fight. That's essentially it. If you put up any resistance, at all when you're in the middle of a bout of anger, then that will disrupt the flow of your neuroses. I mean, it just throws them off. I love this moment in this movie. I don't know if any of you have seen it, called In America. And it's, there's this, I don't remember the kind of era or whatever, maybe the 80s or something like that, this Irish family who moves to Manhattan, and there's this artist who lives below them, and he appears to be mentally off-center, played by this wonderful actor, Jaimin Hansu. And he's this very beautiful, commanding black guy who's an amazing artist who looks totally mentally unstable. And the Irish family has these two little girls who kind of go down and they see him doing his thing. But this is so great, it's like the young child still has relatively much more pure view and is not thrown off by what the mother and father are, who are being like, the father in particular is like, you are not to go near this guy. And but the artist treats them with like total loving care. And there's one point that the father comes down, and he's in the middle of a bout of mental affliction, very intense, a lot of things going terribly wrong in his life. And so he gets in front of, and then he's going to use this guy to just regurgitate all of his anger on. And it's such an amazing scene, because he basically starts to like threaten him. Like, don't come near my family, my daughters, my wife, anything like that. And just like, this is how perverse we start getting in the middle of affliction. He's just like, what is it? What do you love them? Do you want them? Do you want my wife? Do you love my wife? And he's the artist looking, and he's like, yes, I do love them. I do love your wife. And I love you. And then he looks at him and he's just like, I even love your anger. And he then embraces him. And it so disorients him in this moment that, he kind of eventually kind of jerks away. And that's exactly what this point is about, is that it will completely disrupt your anger. Is like, what the, like, wait a minute, no, this is not, no, anger does this, and you immediately are throwing that off kilter. So it really is not letting the affliction control your mind and body. That's really what self-control is. So you're putting it up. You're like immediately putting up your dukes, and it's like, if this is if this is like this is your compassion and this is your wisdom, and it's just immediately, it's like, okay, what do I need to do right here? I'm in the middle of this shit, and it's just like, I've got to come, it's got to be method. I've got to get compassionate with this person, and that's all going on inside of your mind, and it's like whatever works for you. If it's like, I need to beat this anger down into submission, I will. It's because I don't ever want to experience this again, and I don't want to see anyone else ever experiencing it again. All right. I would so love to keep going, but I think that's at a good place, because we have a bit more in this, and then there is the seventh and final point. And I was going to have the last class next week, but I need to go out of town for some teachings, and so we're going to do the final class on November 3rd. So you're going to be gone by then? Oh man, Veronica. Exactly, it's all good. It's all good. Please do. Yes. So that will be very, very, very sweet. So please do not drive here tomorrow. I mean, next week on Thursday night. But we will finish up on the 3rd, and there is a wonderful workshop this weekend, the Tibetan Heart Yoga, which is the special yoga that's taught here from the lineage of the Dalai Lamas, which is amazing. I mean, it's like a moving meditation doing this yoga practice, and our yoga director is wonderful. I mean, she's teaching an entire first series. So the way it's structured is Friday through Sunday, but she's put it out there that drop-ins are welcome. So I highly, highly recommend it. She's amazing, as many people can attest here to, and the practice is amazing. Yes, indeed. And this is also a holiday for some of us, a very special one. So I thank you all, for celebrating it here and being here with me and teaching me in this beautiful way on this special day. So I thank you very much. And please be happy with these practices. Thank you so much. It's a secret.